Millionaire betrays and humiliates his wife at the altar, but she never expected it to be with her sister. Now she wants revenge, and everything changed when... I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. The air inside the church was thick with incense and white roses. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The flowers, the lights, the melody of the piano. Everything had to be perfect. Michelle stood at the altar, dressed in an immaculate wedding gown, her hands trembling slightly as she held her bouquet. In front of her, Davis, the man who had promised to love her, smiled with unsettling confidence, as if he had already won a game she didn't even know she was playing. Around them, the murmurs of the guests blended with the soft music, and for a moment, everything seemed like a dream come true. But perfection is fragile. It only takes a single moment to shatter. The sharp sound of heels clicking against the marble floor made heads turn, first with curiosity, then with disbelief. From the main entrance, a figure emerged, dazzling, imposing, as if the moment belonged to her. Michelle felt her heart stop when she saw her own sister, Emily, walking down the aisle. She wore a wedding dress almost identical to Michelle's, but bolder, tighter, designed to demand attention. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the shock spreading like wildfire. Guests exchanged bewildered glances. Some women covered their mouths in horror. Others whispered urgently, unable to believe what they were seeing. Emily walked with her head held high, her stride confident, triumphant, as if she had already won, as if she were savoring every second of her entrance. One hand rested gently on her stomach, a calculated gesture that made her message clear before she even spoke. When she reached the altar, her eyes locked onto Michelle's before she delivered her words, firm, lethal, without a trace of remorse. "I'm sorry, sister, but this isn't your place. Davis and I are expecting a child. He loves me." Time seemed to freeze. A deafening silence swallowed the church, every guest holding their breath, paralyzed by disbelief. But what truly shattered Michelle wasn't Emily's words, it was Davis's reaction. He didn't deny it. There was no shock on his face, no guilt, not even an attempt at an excuse. Instead, he let out a low, dry chuckle, mocking, cruel. He looked at Michelle with an arrogant smirk, as if he had been waiting for this moment, enjoying the spectacle he had orchestrated. His dark eyes glowed with amusement as he spoke, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You were always so naive, Michelle. This wedding was just your fantasy. Everything you did, everything you paid for, was for nothing. The only woman I want to marry is standing right here, and it's not you." Michelle's world collapsed. Her legs faltered, her body trembled, and her throat tightened. Her mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening, but nothing was logical, nothing made sense. Every pair of eyes in the church bore into her like daggers. Every whisper was a wound slicing deeper. But she didn't fall. She pressed her lips together, her chest rising and falling with controlled fury, but her face remained unreadable. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She would not fall apart. Taking a slow, deep breath, she let go of her bouquet. The white flowers tumbled to the floor, rolling until they stopped at Davis and Emily's feet, a perfect image of love trampled underfoot. And then Michelle smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was something darker, something no one could quite decipher, but it unsettled them all. Davis frowned, expecting her to scream, to collapse in tears, to beg for answers, to put on a pathetic display of heartbreak. But Michelle did none of that. "Now everything makes sense," she murmured. "But don't worry, the real surprise hasn't even begun." Emily blinked, her confidence wavering for the first time. Davis shifted uncomfortably. The guests exchanged nervous glances. Something about Michelle's reaction felt wrong. She didn't look like a woman who had just been destroyed. She looked like a woman planning something. With devastating calm, Michelle turned and began walking slowly down the aisle. Each step echoed through the silent church, every gaze following her. But she never lowered her head. She refused to let them see her as a victim. Davis crossed his arms, feigning indifference, but his clenched jaw betrayed him. Emily, on the other hand, wore a smug smile, convinced she had won. Just before stepping through the grand doors of the church, Michelle paused. She inhaled the crisp night air, then turned slightly, just enough to glance at Davis over her shoulder. "Enjoy your wedding," she whispered, her voice cold as ice. "While it lasts." Davis felt a chill crawl down his spine, but he dismissed it. Emily, still basking in her victory, turned to the priest impatiently. "Let's continue with the ceremony." The whispers never stopped. The wedding went on, but something was off. The air was thick with unease, something no one could name, but everyone felt. Outside the church, Michelle took a deep breath. The night breeze tousled her hair, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt determined. This wasn't just a betrayal. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just her sister stealing everything she had built. This was war, and Michelle did not plan to lose. Before we continue with the story, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. The echoes of murmurs still lingered inside the church as Michelle stepped through the grand doors and into the night. The cold wind wrapped around her, but she didn't shiver. Her hands were still trembling, not from sorrow, but from barely contained fury. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. Everything that had just happened still felt unreal. Davis's betrayal, her sister's mockery, the public humiliation. But something inside her remained steady. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to break. Not now. She hailed a taxi without a word, staring at her reflection in the window. Her once pristine wedding dress now only served as a painful reminder of how blind she had been. For a fleeting moment, she felt foolish for not seeing the signs earlier, but the self-pity faded quickly. There was no room for regret. Only one certainty remained. If Davis and Emily thought this was over, they were wrong. The taxi took her straight to her apartment. As she stepped inside, the heavy silence wrapped around her like a suffocating fog. This was the home she had built for her future with Davis. Every corner had been decorated with love, every detail chosen with care, always imagining their life together. Now, it all felt like a cruel joke. She ripped off her veil and tossed it to the floor, walking directly to the mirror. She stared at herself. Her eyes still burned with fury, but beneath it, pain simmered like an ember refusing to die. She couldn't let herself break. Not yet. With cold fingers, she grabbed her phone, her mind already calculating her next move. The betrayal hadn't happened overnight. Davis and Emily had been deceiving her for months, maybe years. If they had orchestrated something this cruel, there had to be proof. Her heart pounded as she unlocked her phone and accessed the joint bank account she had opened with Davis. Her breath hitched as she saw exactly what she had suspected. Large sums of money had been transferred to an unknown account within the past 48 hours. Her stomach twisted. Davis had been stealing from her. But that wasn't the worst part. Among the transaction records, one name stood out: Emily Montenegro. Michelle gripped her phone tightly, a bitter smile curling her lips. They hadn't just betrayed her emotionally, they had also robbed her blind. Davis never intended to marry her out of love. It had all been a setup. "Fool," she muttered, but there was no sorrow in her voice, only a dark, seething determination. She scrolled through her photos, searching for anything, any clue, any detail she could use against them. And then, she found it. A message screenshot she had forgotten to delete. "Emily, everything is set. Michelle suspects nothing. The money will be in your account before the wedding. Just tolerate her attitude a little longer, and soon she'll be out of the way." The air left Michelle's lungs. There it was. The proof. The confirmation that the wedding had been nothing but a trap. She collapsed onto the bed, not in despair, but in relief. Because now, she had clarity. Now, she knew exactly what needed to be done. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "I need to see you. It's urgent." The voice on the other end hesitated before replying. "Is this about Davis?" Michelle smirked, a cold fire burning in her chest. "This is about his downfall." She hung up and set the phone aside, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was no longer the naive woman who had dreamed of a perfect wedding. She was a woman on a mission. But before she executed her plan, she needed to see with her own eyes what Davis and Emily were celebrating. She changed into dark, understated clothing. Her wedding dress lay abandoned on the floor, a discarded relic of a life that had never truly existed. Grabbing her bag, she left her apartment, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. Half an hour later, she arrived at the venue where her failed wedding had taken place. The grand entrance was still brightly lit. From the outside, muffled laughter and conversation floated into the night air. A celebration. Michelle walked forward with steady steps, the sharp sound of her heels against the pavement the only thing grounding her. She stopped next to a large side window, her body tensing as she peered inside. There they were, Davis and Emily, laughing, toasting with champagne, surrounded by the very same guests who had witnessed Michelle's humiliation just hours before. The sight made her stomach churn, but what surprised her the most was the reaction of the people around them. Some looked uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact with Emily and Davis. Others whispered in hushed tones, clearly scandalized. Michelle even spotted an old university friend stepping away from the group, disgust evident on her face. Not everyone was on their side. That meant she wasn't alone. She inhaled sharply, closing her eyes. When she opened them again, her gaze had changed. She stepped away from the window and pulled out her phone. The person she had called earlier had sent her a message with a location. "Meet me in 30 minutes. I have what you need." For the first time that night, Michelle truly smiled. Because while Davis and Emily clinked their glasses, believing themselves untouchable, she was already making her next move. The betrayal of Davis and Emily no longer hurt. It was now a venom in her veins, a fire that burned with every passing second. She sat in a discreet cafe, far from the noise of the city. This meeting had been arranged with urgency, and she knew her contact would not disappoint. The cafe door creaked open. Michelle lifted her gaze and saw Santiago, an old friend from university. He had always been sharper than he seemed, someone who knew how to navigate the shadows. Without preamble, he took a seat across from her and placed a thick envelope on the table. "I was surprised by your call. It's been years," he said. Michelle wasted no time. "I need information on Davis and Emily. I know they've been stealing from me, but I want proof. I want to destroy them." Santiago narrowed his eyes, intrigued. "You were always smart, Michelle. But this isn't just about a broken heart, is it? If Davis funneled your money elsewhere, there's more at stake. Are you ready for what you might find?" She nodded without hesitation. Santiago slid the envelope toward her. When she opened it, her pulse quickened. Photographs of Davis in clandestine meetings with suspicious businessmen, documents of financial transfers to offshore accounts, records of hidden financial movements, and the worst, contracts linking Davis to illegal business deals. Her throat went dry. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had used her as a tool for money laundering. Closing her eyes for a moment, she felt the weight of this revelation settle deep within her. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. "How did you get this?" she asked in a low voice. Santiago smirked. "I have my ways, but what matters is what you'll do with it. If you go to the police, make sure he has no escape. If you choose another route, be meticulous." Michelle tucked the envelope into her bag, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "I'll make him regret every lie, every insult, every cent he stole from me. And I'll do it in the only way that truly hurts him, by taking away his power and his reputation." Santiago studied her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You're stronger than I remember. Just be careful, Michelle. A desperate man is a dangerous man." She stood up, her gaze sharper than ever. "Davis no has power over me anymore. And soon, he won't have anything." Hours later, inside Davis and Emily's house, the living room light was still on when Michelle slipped inside. She knew Davis wouldn't be home, and Emily, well, Emily had never been cautious. She moved effortlessly through the space, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with the thrill of reclaiming control. Reaching Davis's office, she powered on his computer. The password hadn't changed. Idiot. She navigated through files, finding exactly what she had suspected. Fraudulent contracts, shady negotiation emails, enough evidence to destroy his career. But the most interesting find was a recent conversation with a contact named Alcone. "Tomorrow, the deal is closing. I need the money ready. Make sure no one finds out. Michelle narrowed her eyes. There was something bigger happening, something Davis couldn't afford to lose. She took photos of everything, ensuring she left no trace of her presence. When Emily woke up, she wouldn't even realize Michelle had been there. But Davis would. Very soon. The next day, phase 1 of her revenge began. Social media exploded with an anonymous leak exposing Davis's affairs and financial fraud. Michelle hadn't revealed everything yet, just enough to make the press and his investors start asking questions. Davis, who had always prided himself on controlling his public image, now found himself at the center of a media firestorm. In his office, he hurled his phone against the wall. "Who did this?" he roared. Emily, pale, scrolled through her phone with shaking hands. "Davis, people are saying the money for our wedding came from illegal funds. They're investigating everything." A chill ran down Davis's spine. This couldn't be happening. And then, his assistant entered the room, her face ashen. "Sir, we have a bigger problem." Davis clenched his jaw. "What now?" She swallowed hard. "Michelle is here." Time stopped. "What?" Davis stormed toward the conference room, his blood boiling. And there she was, sitting at the table, sipping coffee with unsettling calm. "Hello, Davis." His fists clenched. "What the hell did you do?" Michelle simply smiled. "I just did what you planned for me. I let the world see who you really are." A shiver crawled up Davis's spine. "You have no idea who you're messing with." But Michelle simply tilted her head, mockingly. "Neither do you, Davis. And that is what I love most about this." Davis's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her. This wasn't the woman he once manipulated. She stood up, placing an envelope on the table. "You should read it. It's a list of what happens next if you don't return every single cent you stole from me." With trembling hands, Davis opened it. And with each line he read, he felt his entire world collapsing. "This isn't over," he muttered. Michelle met his gaze, her eyes cold as steel. "For you, Davis, this is just beginning." The echo of Michelle's heels resonated with authority as she walked through the corridors of Davis's company. Her world had changed in a matter of days, and now she was the one in control. Ever since she leaked the first pieces of information about Davis's fraud, investors had become nervous, the press wouldn't stop asking questions, and his name was everywhere. But this was only the beginning. Davis had yet to feel the full weight of what was coming. She stepped into the meeting room where Santiago, her ally in this war, and a man in an expensive suit with an impenetrable expression were waiting for her. "Michelle, meet Arturo Medina. He's the attorney who will make sure Davis doesn't just lose his reputation. He ends up exactly where he belongs." Arturo extended his hand with a subtle smile. "It's a pleasure, Ms. Michelle. I've reviewed the documents, and I can assure you we have enough material to bury Davis in a legal battle. But there's something even more interesting. Did you know he forged your signature on contracts to funnel money into his hidden accounts?" Michelle felt her chest tighten, not from pain but from pure, controlled fury. He hadn't just betrayed her with her sister. He hadn't just stolen her money. He had also framed her in his dirty business. "So that means I can legally sue him for fraud?" she asked, her voice cold. Arturo nodded. "And not just that. If we take this to court with these documents, his only way out will be pleading guilty to reduce his sentence." Michelle narrowed her eyes, processing the information. Davis's fate was sealed. Now, all that remained was delivering the final blow. That same night, Davis and Emily dined in an upscale restaurant. Emily tried to smile, but the tension in her body was obvious. Ever since news of Davis's fraud broke, her calls with investors had been strained. Contracts were in jeopardy, and the shadow of scandal loomed over them. "Davis, we need to do something. Everyone is talking about you, and people are starting to pull away. I don't want this to affect us," she murmured, trying to sound calm, but her voice betrayed her nerves. Davis shot her an irritated glance. Emily had never been more than a distraction to him. "Shut up and let me think." But before he could say anything else, the giant restaurant screens lit up with a live broadcast. Davis and Emily froze as Michelle appeared on the screen, standing behind a podium, surrounded by cameras and journalists. "Good evening, everyone. This is an official statement regarding the financial fraud committed by Davis Rivas. The restaurant fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned to the screen. Davis's breath caught in his throat as Michelle, with devastating composure, exposed every single one of his crimes, documents in hand. Davis Rivas took advantage of my trust and my finances to hide illegal transactions, using my name to forge contracts. What I once thought was love was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated fraud. But today, his impunity ends. The air grew thick. Whispers spread through the restaurant. People began murmuring, staring at Davis with disgust, pulling out their phones to record him live. Emily covered her mouth with a trembling hand, her face draining of color. "Davis, what is this?" she whispered, voice barely audible. Davis shot up from his seat, jaw clenched, hands trembling with rage. He was trapped. He stormed toward the exit, but the moment he stepped outside, paparazzi cameras flashed like lightning, blinding him. The humiliation was absolute, and on the screen, Michelle's gaze met his one last time before she ended her speech with the words that shattered him completely. "Davis, I hope you enjoy your last night as a free man." Hours later, inside Emily's house, the sound of shattering glass filled the air as Davis hurled a wine glass against the wall. His rage was uncontrollable. How the hell did she do it? "That damn woman ruined me." Emily, pale and trembling, tried to step closer. "Davis, we need to think of a way out. Maybe if you talk to the investors." "Shut up. You're part of this mess too." If Michelle talked, someone helped her. Emily took a step back, fear settling in her chest. For the first time, she saw true desperation in Davis's eyes. But before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Emily turned to Davis, terror flashing in her eyes. "No, it can't be. They're already here for you?" Davis swallowed hard, his step slow, his mind racing. He reached the door and pulled it open. His face went pale. Michelle stood there, standing on the threshold, calm, poised, and completely in control. "Hello, Davis. Aren't you going to invite me in?" His fists clenched, but he couldn't speak. "Oh, relax," Michelle said with a mocking smile. "I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet." Davis's blood boiled. "What the hell do you want from me, Michelle? Isn't ruining me enough for you?" She tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "No, Davis. I'm not finished with you yet." Emily, watching from the hallway, felt a chill crawl down her spine. For the first time in her life, she truly feared Michelle. Davis slammed the door shut, his breath ragged as his mind struggled to process what had just happened. Michelle stood before him, her gaze disturbingly calm, as if everything she had done so far was merely the prelude to something far worse. "What do you want now?" he growled through clenched teeth, his voice dripping with frustration and fear. Michelle tilted her head slightly, a soft, almost amused smile on her lips. "I just came to check on you, Davis. After all, it's been a rough day for you." Emily, who had remained silent at the back of the room, finally gathered the courage to speak. "Michelle, if you came here to humiliate us, you've already done it. You don't need to keep this up." Michelle shifted her gaze to her sister, studying her with quiet intensity. Emily no longer had the arrogance she had displayed when she walked into the church in white. Now, her confidence crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. "Humiliate you?" Michelle took a slow step forward, her expression unreadable. "Oh, Emily, if you think this is about revenge, you've understood nothing." Davis frowned, his entire body rigid. "Then what the hell do you want?" Michelle crossed her arms, exuding complete control as she watched them like a predator assessing its prey. "I came to give you one last chance, Davis. Return everything you stole from me. If you do, maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to salvage what little you have left." Davis let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Are you threatening me?" Michelle didn't answer immediately. She let the question linger in the air, allowing the weight of silence to settle. Then, with chilling calm, she spoke. "I'm just giving you an honorable way out. But if you'd rather fight, then prepare to lose everything." Emily clutched Davis's arm with desperation. "Davis, listen to her. Maybe there's a way to fix this. But Davis was too consumed by anger to think clearly. His fists tightened, his jaw clenched even harder. "Get the hell out of my house." Michelle sighed and turned to Emily one last time. "If you decide to save yourself, Emily, you'll know where to find me." She turned on her heels and walked toward the door, unrushed, unbothered. She knew she had planted a seed of doubt in her sister's mind, and that was enough. Davis waited until the door shut behind Michelle before hurling a glass against the wall with all his fury. "Damn it! She can't do this to me." Emily watched him with growing fear. For the first time, she realized Davis was finished. Michelle arrived at her apartment and sank into the couch. Despite her unbreakable exterior, her heart pounded against her ribs. She had spent years dreaming of this moment, of making Davis pay for everything, and now she was one step away from watching him fall completely. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she already knew by heart. "It's done. Proceed with the next step." The voice on the other end responded with icy precision. "In less than 24 hours, Davis will be history." Michelle closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensation of justice wash over her. Finally, everything was in place. Davis woke to the relentless buzzing of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. His head pounded from the alcohol he had drowned himself in the night before. He answered without even checking who was calling. "What?" The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. "Davis, we have a problem. The bank has frozen all your accounts. You have no access to a single cent." Davis bolted upright, a cold chill running through his veins. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You heard me. Someone filed a formal fraud complaint, and with all the evidence against you, authorities have launched an investigation. You're completely blocked." Davis felt his chest tighten. This couldn't be happening. He hurled his phone across the room and jumped to his feet. He needed a solution. Fast. He stormed into the bedroom where Emily was still asleep. "Get up. I need money." Emily stirred, blinking in confusion at his harsh tone. "What? Davis, what's going on?" "I said I need money. All of it." Emily sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Davis, what's wrong?" "Michelle happened, that's what." She froze everything. "If I don't get cash now, I'm done." Emily stared at him in stunned silence, processing what he had just said. Finally, she spoke. "I don't have any money, Davis." His eyes burned into hers. "What do you mean you don't have any?" "I spent everything I had on this damn wedding." Davis's rage boiled over. Everything he had built, everything he had planned, was crumbling right before his eyes. He stormed out of the room, desperate for a way out. But the truth was inescapable. There was none. Michelle watched the news with a satisfied smile. The headlines left no room for doubt. Businessman Davis Rivas faces severe fraud allegations. His fortune has been frozen, and authorities are expected to summon him for questioning in the coming hours. She swirled a glass of wine in her hand, savoring the moment. After years of pain, she had finally achieved what she wanted. But this wasn't over yet. She rose from the couch and walked toward the window, gazing at the city lights. She knew Davis would try to fight back, but now he was cornered. She picked up her phone and dialed again. "It's time for the next move." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Everything is ready. He has nowhere to run." Michelle smiled. "Perfect." Davis's end was closer than ever. Davis breathed heavily, his heart pounding against his chest as he paced through the chaotic mess of his apartment. The blinds were half open, allowing a faint glow from the streetlights to cast eerie shadows across the room. Empty bottles, crumpled papers, discarded clothes. Everything around him mirrored the wreckage of his life. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, trying to suppress the boiling rage inside him. Everything was gone. His fortune, frozen. His reputation, shattered. Michelle had reduced him to nothing with surgical precision. Emily sat motionless on the couch, her gaze vacant. Her face was swollen from crying, her wedding dress still stained with remnants of ruined makeup. She hadn't spoken in hours. "I can't live like this," Davis muttered, more to himself than to her. Emily blinked slowly, looking at him with a hollow expression. "And what do you plan to do?" Davis clenched his jaw. He didn't have a plan. He only had desperation. And then, the apartment door burst open. A group of men in dark suits walked in without hesitation. Emily jumped in fear, while Davis took a step back, his pulse skyrocketing. The first to speak was a stern-looking lawyer, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Rivas, you have been served with a seizure order. All your assets will be confiscated immediately." Davis felt the ground beneath him collapse. "What the hell are you talking about?" he barked. The lawyer didn't flinch. "All your properties were collateral for fraudulent loans. Since your accounts have been blocked and you have no means to settle your debts, your possessions will be repossessed, effective immediately." Davis let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "This is insane. You can't take everything from me." One of the court officers stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "This is the official documentation. You can review it, but it won't change anything." Emily covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Davis, what do we do?" Davis felt the panic creeping in. Everything was spiraling out of his control. And then, a familiar voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Did you really think you were going to escape this?" Michelle stepped inside, her movements deliberate, poised, completely in command. She was a storm wrapped in elegance, exuding the quiet power of someone who had already won. Her eyes held no sympathy, only certainty. Davis felt a blind fury explode inside him. "You did this. You're a damned witch." Michelle smiled, calm, unbothered. "No, Davis. You did this to yourself. I simply showed you what happens when you play with the wrong person." Davis clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he was powerless. The officials began collecting documents, seizing the last remnants of his shattered empire. Emily stood up, trembling. "Michelle, please." Michelle turned toward her sister, her expression unreadable. "You made your choice, Emily. Now live with it." Emily collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. She was completely ruined. But Davis wasn't ready to surrender. He took a step toward Michelle, his face twisted with pure hatred. "This isn't over." His voice was low, venomous. Michelle met his stare without flinching, without fear, without emotion. "For you, it is." Her voice was ice. "For me, this is only the beginning." Davis felt something shift inside him, a slow, creeping realization. For the first time in his life, he understood what true fear felt like. Michelle tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were nothing more than a pathetic insect. "Goodbye, Davis." She turned and walked out with the same unshakable grace she had walked in with. She didn't need to watch the final moments of his downfall. She had already won. The night air was cool as Michelle stepped out of the building, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She inhaled deeply, letting the weight of victory settle in her chest. Her phone vibrated inside her bag. "It's done." Michelle's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. Davis's fall was absolute. She slid into her car and started the engine. She was finally free. Weeks later, Michelle sat in her new office. The company Davis once ruled was now hers. An assistant walked in, holding a folder. "Ms. Michelle, the contracts are ready for your signature." She took the pen, her movements slow, deliberate. "Perfect. I want the restructuring finalized within a week." The assistant nodded and left. Michelle leaned back in her chair, allowing herself to take it all in. She had won. She had been betrayed, humiliated, used. But in the end, she was the one still standing. Her phone rang again. "Ms. Michelle, your dinner reservation is confirmed," she smirked. "I won't be late." She grabbed her purse and rose from her chair. Tonight marked the beginning of her new life. And this time, no one would stop her. Thank you for listening to this incredible story until the end. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We also suggest watching the video that appears on the screen so you can discover other amazing stories, because I guarantee you'll be surprised.